Welcome, Dr. Amber Tichenor. I am very pleased to have you here. I've been reading your book, Behind Frenemy Lines, and I'm just in love with it. So I started Lakom when the first season, the question was, why aren't women friends with women? And the feedback I got was between two extremes. We had people who were saying, women actually can work together, and by asking such questions, you are perpetuating this negativity around women. And to the other extreme, which was women will never be able to work together and you're just wasting your time. So after reading your book, the first thing that I asked myself was, why did she write that book?
There are many reasons why I wrote it. Thank you first for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. So I was doing research. My background is in organizational psychology. So I was very fascinated about the ins and outs of the working environment. I had to pick a topic for my PhD, and I knew I wanted it to be something that involved women. I'm very passionate about women's issues. It had to be something in the working environment. At that time, I was on a very well-known client site, and I saw it happening, this female rivalry. And it wasn't directed toward me, but it was going on in my team and in my immediate area. And it was hugely disruptive to the culture. And I thought, what's going on here? Like, no one was addressing it. It was like the big elephant in the boardroom. People were tiptoeing around it, and then good women were leaving, and it just made a really not nice culture to work in. And so that's when I decided I wanted to do research on this topic. So I specifically did my PhD dissertation focusing only on the working environment. And then after I wrapped that up and got my PhD, I kept collecting stories from women. And I realized, yes, this is a big issue at work, but also it's just a big issue between women in general. And so many ins and outs of our daily lives, in our families, in our social environments, where we worship, at the schools, it's there. And so that's how so many of the stories I've been collecting are portrayed in Behind Frenemy Lines. So, and then I experienced it. So that I experienced it after I studied it. So that was a big eye-opening moment.
Yeah. I've even read some parts in the book that talk about how women grow up and the environment around them or the culture pits them against each other. And I'm just wondering, is that kind of relationship, or let's say this rivalry between women, the jealousy, is it something innate or is it learned?
I think it's both. It's a definite combination of both. I think first, it definitely can be in an environment where you see it occurring. It can be, you're learning this behavior from a strong female figure. It can be, maybe you are born into an environment where you're never good enough, so you're always being compared. It can be passed down generationally. It can be in a culture, it can be in a society. So it can be a learned behavior. I think back to my daughter, who when she was 5 years old and in kindergarten, I was naively thinking, oh, we have a few years before this behavior is going to start occurring. She came home and was telling me about some of the actions that were happening on the playground. And I thought, there's no way that is innate in a little girl. She's learning that from somebody. So she was seeing it. So I do think it's both. I think the other aspect of it where it can be innate within you is how you feel about yourself. I'm a firm believer that if you are happy with yourself, if you like the skin you are in, you are going to like other women. If you are unhappy with yourself, chances are you'll project that behavior outward because it's a part of who you are. So I call that little voice in the back of your head, your inner she bully. So it's a combination.
Yeah. So why is it jealousy or rivalry and not competition? Competition could be healthy.
Oh, 100%. I think there are some wonderful positive or healthy competition. So when I started talking about rivalry, I use that as the broader banner of the behavior. So in the broader banner, and because when I first started my research, there really wasn't just one name for this type of behavior. So I had to go back to aggressive behavior. So rivalry seemed to fit the bill for the broader banner. Within rivalry, there are several layers. So there's competition, there's envy, and there's jealousy. So competition, I think, can be a wonderful thing. I think positive competition can push you to do better. I think if you have positive competition amongst teams or any group of people, if you use it in the right way, it can better all of you together. Then there's the next level is envy, and that's when healthy competition gets an edge. So it starts to turn a little bit ugly. You're starting to think, oh, I don't like necessarily what she is doing or what she has, and you want more of what she is doing or what she has. And then there is a full-on jealousy, and that's, I want what you have. I will do whatever I can to be or have what you have, even if it means taking you out of the picture to get to that level.
Mm-hmm.
So competition, I think you can excel others in a positive way, but rivalry is more on that one-on-one against each other type of behavior.
Yeah. I think one of the research papers you mentioned, and I thought it was very interesting, was the statement was women fight with each other and they also want and expect total union and sympathy from women. How does that work?
Yeah. It's like a double-edged sword. It's like we're women and you expect women to have your back and stand up for you, but when push comes to shove, if she has something that you want, you might want to take her out for it. So we want this sisterhood, but then there's this whole other level of this ugly behavior that comes out of the rivalries, which stems from so many things. But I think we can turn it around.
Do you feel part of that rivalry, what you're talking about, is impacted by social media today, or I like to call it more of the hustle culture that you see on social media, especially between women? She's doing something that I want to be doing, even if it's unrealistic. And you
absolutely. Absolutely. I think society endorses this behavior. I think, it's called a cat fight. It's women being dramatic. You look at reality shows, pivoting women against women, and people think that's funny, or there's a comedial aspect to it, when really it's so opposite. There's a lot of hurt, but that's not what's shown. So I think you look at it's something to be made fun of, and then you see women tearing each other down. There's no space or room at the top for more than one. I think that feeds into it. I think in the social media and the hustle bustle culture, it's so common that, let's say we are doing the same thing. Maybe you have a business and I have a business, and they could be similar, but you're a completely different person and I'm a completely different person. But automatically, 9 times out of 10, the thought is we're competitors. There's no way we could work together to, help each other out. But chances are you are going to go about the work and the way you do things very differently than how I go about it, just because it's part of your personality, it's part of your work ethics, everything involved. And so it's easy, with how things are portrayed in social media and the public pop culture to just automatically think competition when it doesn't have to be that way. And
that's also something we see internally within organizations, where
Yes.
bad leadership, toxic environments can actually pit women against each other.
100%, especially if you are in an environment, again, the glass ceiling, or where there's less room at the top. The culture is endorsing the toxic behavior because maybe I want to be the VP, but you're my competition. So there's not room for both of us. There's no other way to do it. And so that's when the rivalries can get really bad.
Maybe because there's no room for us at the top, where it's in organizations, it tends to be, if there will be a woman picked, it would be one woman. So yes, I need to compete with you because there's only one space that can be filled by a female.
Exactly. And I think that's also where the conversation needs to change. I mean, it's baby steps, but women should have an equal place at the table. But that's hugely part when you have these cultures that aren't accepting of women, or they're pivoting women, or it's a culture that, will sweep the big elephant under the rug. It's certainly not going to be a culture then that is an advocate of open communication and transparency, where you could talk about these things and implement change.
You've discussed at one point, when it comes to the relationship between women, that my behavior sometimes could be triggering someone else's, let's say, negative behaviors.
So chances are, go ahead.
It's fair for me to think, or to have to tiptoe around someone if they have issues. Why do I have to change the perspective to maybe I'm the one who's doing something wrong?
I don't think you have to change. I think often when the behavior is directed toward you, it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the person that is implementing the behavior. I think so often in organizations or societies, we think we need to change our behavior to accommodate what she is doing. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's not openly talked about. No one talks about this type of behavior. It appears to be a toxic behavior. And so people don't know how to talk about it. So it's not talked about. So I have had women tell me, they told me it was my fault or my problem. And do I think that's accurate? No, I think it was probably everything to do with the other woman, but organizations don't right now, a lot of them have the capacity or the capability to understand what to do or how to change the culture to eliminate this type of negativity.
I feel that kind of fuels self-doubt, because you're constantly, if you're in a situation where you're trying to be assertive, you're taken as being aggressive. But then isn't that something subjective? Maybe what I find aggressive is not what you find aggressive. You find it more, no, she's assertive. So where do I draw the line between what I feel and what the others feel, and where I should go, in which direction?
I'm a firm believer that, we all have different personalities and we all have different ways that we do things. You be you. Why should you have to change who you are or modify who you are if you are authentically doing and being your true self? Some people may be offended. She's too strong. She's too assertive. Those probably aren't your people. It's harder in a working environment if there are certain rules and protocols. But I think anytime that somebody is asked to modify who they are, that never feels good. It feels like you aren't being true to you and you aren't being authentic. And so that's not a nice feeling.
Maybe not modify as much as grow. I know women, when they go up the ladder at work and they start to get those higher jobs, they're kind of expected to be tougher. That's a modification where you can see it as maybe that's not a good thing, but then it comes with the role. It doesn't come with the character herself. She needs to be tougher because she has to make more decisions.
Sure.
But then I feel most of the times it's perceived as you changed. Whereas it's not, it's the role that I have to play now.
Well, and it's growth. And sometimes growth, if you are having change and growth, others might be intimidated or put off by that. Again, because you're rising and you're moving upwards and others may not. It changes hard on all levels. Change is hard when you are experiencing it, and you are altering yourself to get to these new roles, and altering is a stronger word, but yeah, you do have to, you're learning, things are going to be different, but a lot of people don't like change, whether it's towards somebody they know or to themselves personally, and they are threatened by it.
Mhm. It's one of the studies you have here, which talks about the organizational culture. And I find it very interesting because 3 different types of organizations, which is sex integrated organization, all female organization, or male dominated organization. And I found this interesting because I came from a very male dominated organization. And even though we were less women, I found that we did not have each other's back. And it was interesting because most of the gossip came from the men, actually.
Wow. Yeah.
But who ended up being caught within that gossip was the women.
Yeah.
And I myself did feel like there was bullying, and men had traits of females, or let's say characteristics you would attribute to females when it came to the culture, but they weren't as affected by it as much as we were.
It's hard, I think, because traditionally men aren't as impacted as much as females are in these types of situations. Is that right? No, but I think that's traditionally how these things play out.
But it's interesting that the opinion of women mattered more, because if it was a guy that said something to me, it wouldn't have mattered. But then if it's a woman, I would have thought twice. Like, did I? Maybe
That's
I did.
clear. And I agree with you on that. With women, the way we relate to each other, again, going back to your question, we want that sisterhood, we want that support. And so when you hear something, it stings more because we're more like women than we are men as women. For a man to say it, you would question it, but it has a bigger sting from another female. And I think in the studies and the work I did, going back to the foundation of my research, I had to figure out what theories of behavioral traits this stemmed in. And so I came to theories of aggression, but what I also came across is social intelligence, and that little girls will develop social intelligence at a younger age than little boys will. And so that is when the brain starts kicking in. Boys will be more overt in aggression with the behaviors, like wrestling and tumbling, where girls will start to react verbally. And so that's when the intangible and the passive aggressive comments come. So it stings. And so when something is said about you, and when women argue, it's not just about what you're talking about at hand, it encompasses everything. It's about your looks, it's about the car you drive, it's about your kiddo that's doing better than math class than theirs. When men traditionally argue and have it out, they are maybe in the boardroom talking and they get heated and they have a few words. An hour later, they could be out on the golf course with each other, having a beer and playing golf and acting like nothing ever happened. But for women, we linger onto it.
Why do we linger on and hold a grudge? I never got it. I don't understand.
I don't either. I think it's part of that social intelligence and the just how we think, and it's just a different way of thinking. But it's very rare that I know a female that doesn't hang on to things. Like, men just seem to let it go a little easier, and that's totally generalizing, but it's something that has come up in the studies. It's hard, I think for women, it's hard to let things go. And I think it comes back to that, the sisterhood.
Yeah.
We want our female counterparts, our women friends, to have our back. And when they don't, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of deceit. And you think, well, why would she treat me that way when I wouldn't do that to her?
Why do we put so much expectation on other women? I think even that is maybe a bit immature for us to assume, because I see maybe one of the problems we do face is setting boundaries as women with each other. So
Yeah.
if I had a female boss, there's this assumption that you would understand if I wasn't feeling well today, or I have to go home for the kids, I would assume that you should understand, whereas that wouldn't be the case if it was a male. So maybe we're not setting the correct boundaries where I'm respecting her role. And that's why I see it as her being mean.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think we do need to set boundaries. I think if you don't know that person, why would you have a different expectation from a male versus female boss? But I think more often than not, we do. We expect that there is a sisterhood or female empathy because we are of the same sex, because for so long we've had to try harder to be equal to our male counterparts. And then years ago, I mean, I'm generalizing, but in the era of hunting and gathering, women bonded together more. Women were more communal in what they did and how they did things. They hunted, they raised children together. There was a more community aspect. So chances are you don't live in that type of environment anymore. I mean, I don't, I have friends all around me, but we do things in our house and in our community very individually. So there's so many questions as to why, but I think we do have expectations sometimes. But then when you're setting boundaries, then not everybody's always on board with that either.
This brings me to when you talked about the attributes of the women who shared their stories.
Yes.
And you mentioned things like they were frank, they were direct, they were outspoken. And it brought me back to, what if the stories they shared was their perspective, and maybe they were the aggressive person who might have triggered the colleague into doing those things. Some of the stories were obvious. A manager that goes through, a boss that goes through 12 employees in the past few years. No, there's a problem with that manager. But then in other stories, if she was only the problem, then maybe she was the problem.
Yeah, I agree. It would be fascinating to sit. I don't need to, it could be anonymous, but I would love to get the other woman's story, because you're right. It's not speculation. I am taking at word for what these women shared with me. But it would have been so insightful to then turn around and find that other woman and just say, please give me a recount of how you viewed this same situation. What I have found is, yes, I think chances are, if you are going to be the target of a female rivalry type of behavior, you're in the way of whomever is projecting it. It could be you, or it could be somebody else. It's her doing what she's doing to get where she wants to be. But you also, I think you always need to step back. I think you need to do a self-check. I think a self-check is a reality check. How am I coming across to people? Am I working with people who are from a different culture? So the way I'm coming across might be very different to how they are interacting in their culture, and vice versa. Practice the pause. Think about just taking in anything. I try to do this with my kids, with my life, but before I react, really be mindful and not jump into a conclusion or a reaction about something. And change your mindset, because it could be you, and it could be, I had one woman, she's like, I think people thought I was stuck up and not nice. And she's like, I'm shy. I get so intimidated when I'm in a group of people that I just don't really talk. And so, there's so many different faucets.
Yeah, which brings me to the third part, the victory part in your book, which I think
Yeah.
everyone can benefit from, not just women, because
Yeah.
you're highlighting some of the most important, let's say, skills we need to have.
Yeah.
Which for me are self-awareness and self-reflection.
Yes.
I'm a huge proponent of emotional intelligence and how
Yeah.
women should work on their own emotional intelligence, because that helps with setting boundaries. And then even with conflicts at work, they can understand where they can do better, where they did wrong. And then with emotional intelligence, there is the social awareness, then realizing how other people are feeling towards them. And it's so important that self-awareness is something that you can do in the workplace.
And in and out of the workplace. And I think why it is, the emotional intelligence aspect is so huge, because if how we are, we may all have, obviously we all have different experiences in our lives of how we got to where we are. But when you are looking inward to know how you can approach a situation, how you can not approach a situation, it's just mindfulness. And I think if we all had a little bit more of that, there's that self-aware, not only for yourself but for others, because that's how we interact better together.
So I know you have a huge part in the book that talks about how as women we can show up for each other, but just in general, how can we do better as women for each other and for the men in our community?
Well, some of this we've just talked about a little bit, but I think that self-check, looking inward, that she bully, if you have that voice that's back here constantly talking, and I think so many times the negative things we say to ourselves are never in a million years what we would say to somebody else. So if you have that going on, you need to reel it in, because you need to like yourself. So it's regulating that inner negativity, practicing the pause, changing the mindset. If you're in a working environment, I think it's working together to embody a community of collaboration and trust. With everything, with the consulting work I've done and the work I'm doing now, communication is key, and it's transparent communication so that every voice can feel heard. So that's the psychological safety aspect of this, that you truly, when you are showing up in an environment, you're being heard and you feel safe to voice what you have to say. So be an includer. Are you going to be best friends with everybody? No, but that doesn't mean you are unkind, and it doesn't mean that you exclude. So you can bring everybody in, and when you establish community, it becomes a safer place. And definitely in an organizational setting, or in more in bigger groups, implement bystander training, have awareness of this, and then let it be known that it won't be tolerated. So but that first can only be done by having the clear and transparent communication.
I know you've mentioned a few things you can do if you're within a toxic culture. But at what point do you have to make the decision to just leave?
I had to do that myself. And so I mentioned at the beginning that I had studied all this, and then I had a rivalry situation. Well, this was after I'd gotten my PhD and I'm working for a client, and I tried everything to work with this woman to change our relationship, because we had the same goal in mind for the organization. And for the life of me, I don't know why I didn't see it. That it was a female rivalry situation. And I was talking to my mom on the phone, driving into work, and I dreaded going to work. And she's like, I just hate to see you doubt yourself when you're really good at what you do. And I had a moment of, oh my God, what am I doing? And so I went in and I quit. And I remember my husband was like, most people don't quit before they have a backup plan. And so I just realized, I think it had been because you lose your voice when you're in such a negative type of situation and you feel squished and I say your world turns gray. It just doesn't stay at work. It comes home with you. It was very hard to verbalize what I was doing until somebody mentioned it to me, and then I could step outside of myself a little bit and see it. So I think if we have more open and transparent communication, good women won't have to walk. But again, if you are in an environment or an organization or even a social group and you feel that you aren't yourself, or you're walking on eggshells, or if you leave the table and you're being talked about, that's probably not the right spot for you. Or the right people to be with, because they are not uplifting and empowering you. So if organizations have more insight about this behavior, I have no doubt that when it's talked about, good women won't walk as much as they are now.
I get a feeling that maybe great women walk into an environment, they're fresh, they're new, they're full of energy, they're confident and everything, and they come in with the intention doing great, even supporting other women. But then as, let's say, the stress comes in, the pressure, you mentioned, you call them internal drivers, which are the fear and low self-esteem start to creep up on you because of that environment. And then it starts that cycle of female rivalry because you've been brought down low. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. And also, if you are somebody new, young, bubbly, I mean, age doesn't have to really matter, but you can be a perceived threat to somebody that's already been there. Like, oh, she's going to take away my shine, or I won't be recognized as much anymore because now we have someone new on the block. It's a combination of all of that, but you can become a threat. And so, when you are being torn down by this female rivalry behavior, it's fearful, you lose your voice. It's very hard to describe because it's often not tangible. And so it's really hard to voice to somebody else what you're going through, but it doesn't feel nice.
Yeah, because you've mentioned that the kind of rivalry women have is passive aggressive. It's not space. Yeah,
very intangible.
Yeah, it's very quiet and it's very silent treatment and everything, but it hurts.
It hurts and you can feel it, but then to turn around and tell somebody, and especially in an organizational setting, if you're working in this community and if the person that's targeting you is in charge of your paycheck or in charge of your career path, like how do you have to document because even if you went to HR, you would have to have a story to share with them about what was occurring.
So there's an interesting question from one of the participants, which is the studies that you've done, was it conducted globally or I'm assuming that's the US?
Yes.
Are we facing this issue more in the Middle East than the Western culture? I don't think so. My opinion is I don't think so. Yeah.
I don't think so either. So all of my studies have been conducted in the US. I would love to expand it. I've just started a survey now where I'm focusing in on the first culture or community I'm looking at is for Black women to get a better understanding of female rivalry between Black women. But then I want to start going to different cultures just to see. I'm with you. I don't think it's worse in some areas. I think it is a behavior amongst women, which is why when I bring up my the cover, I fought really hard to have this cover because I wanted it to be a representation of all women, no matter where you lived or what your demographic is, because I think women all over feel it. So, but there are individuals in the book that maybe weren't born in the US, but now live here. So they do come from different ethnicities.
It's interesting why there aren't, and that's something that I've looked for. There aren't more studies done about women and the relationship between women, emotional intelligence, all of that within this region. Maybe part of it is they're not outspoken about their problems. That's also something that you're taught to, deal with your issues and not talk openly about them.
Exactly. And that could be, the cultural stance. It could be also who would they talk to about it? Like who's going to be maybe I'm feeling it and you're feeling it, but who's going to be the first one to open the door and know it's a safe place to discuss how you're feeling?
Yeah. So we have someone who disagrees, especially with Black women who might feel excluded and feel resentful that they have to work twice as hard to be just as good. Women in the Middle East might resent women who don't cover up, etc.
Sure. I think, that's why it would be so fascinating to really take a deep dive into individual cultures and ethnicities, because there's a lot of different nuances that, are different in your respective location. That's why I'm waiting for the survey results from what I'm doing now to come in. And I can't speak for the Middle East. I've lived in the Middle East, but I wasn't doing my study yet when I lived there. So
this brings me back to the same thing. If it's all across the world, maybe it is something innate. Maybe there is this sense of every woman, because as you said, if it's not at work, she's prettier, she's younger, she's who she's married to, what does she do, all of these things. So maybe it is something where we're constantly competing on that level.
And it could be, and that could be just women. And so that's why, my study for the book was so small compared to the amount of women that are out there. I would love to do a blanket survey and hit every country just to get some insight. So, but I think, like you said, even when I started conducting my research to go back to having what my grounding foundational theory was, there was nothing really out there about female relationships towards each other. So I think it's so big, but it's still so young with what we're discovering and getting people to talk about it, but it's definitely there.
So interesting, the answers for the poll, because so do you think women can work together? 80% answered yes. And 20% is sometimes. No one said no.
Okay.
And then, have you been in a situation where a woman was mean to you for no apparent reason? 50% said yes, 30% no, 20% not sure. But have you been in a situation where a woman was helpful for no reason? Everyone answered yes.
Oh, good.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
It might be that new confident woman walking in and just wanting to be helpful. Because I think we tend to be nurturing in nature. We want to be helpful and everything, until that first incident that tells me to put my guards back on. Yes.
And then that exterior can be hard to take off once it's on there.
Yeah.
But
But this is something that we hope to see more being studied in the Middle East. Me personally, I would hope to have something more in the future. Another question, do you find that the competition between women is found only in the corporate world, or does it occur in other environments like in civil society, sports, schools, or other settings?
I definitely find it's all over. So my research initially started in the corporate setting, but then I just kept receiving, I interviewed the women, and then I would hear more stories about social. I recently gave a talk to one of the universities here for a women's golf team. It's huge in that community. I mean, I think it's all over, and I think it's too bad. But that's why I think it's a larger problem. I think in the work, the work environment, it's a whole different level of a problem, just because your career path and your paycheck is also part of that equation or that package. But no, like neighborhoods, I hear it socially all the time, but sports definitely. And I think the thing that I found so interesting when I was talking to these young women about golf is because that is a team sport, but yet it's really an individual sport in a team setting. And so they showed me a whole bunch of insight that I just hadn't thought about. I'm not a golfer, but it's fascinating.
What can men do to help stop that culture?
I think awareness of this and just knowing it exists. I think men can see it. I think sometimes, especially if they've grown up in, or their family, there are women and they see it with wives, sisters, daughters, whatever. I think, so this was an interesting story. I gave one of my first in-person talks right before the holidays, and it was so nice to be back in a public setting. It was for our local chamber, and it was a women's luncheon. So I walked in and I'm thinking, it's ladies' lunch. Half of the audience was men, and I was caught off guard because I didn't think it would be men. And so I had to switch my like, I'm not here to bash any men. I'm a little surprised that you all are here, but they asked some of the best questions. And I think a lot of times when I give a talk in person, I'll have a poll and have you ever, kind of like what you did, have you ever experienced this, or where have you experienced that? And women will raise their hand. Well, the men were looking around when all the women had their hands raised, answering my questions. They were shocked. I think they were really shocked about how intense this behavior can be, how much to the level that all of these women had experienced it. So I think when we go back to the open transparency and communication, just getting men on board in the conversation, especially if you have daughters or family members, knowing what this looks like and how to facilitate positive behaviors where not that they're purposefully doing anything to pivot women against each other, but just I think that awareness is the key.
Amazing. So yeah. I highly recommend this book, honestly. It's I couldn't put it down. I actually read it twice, and if you can see how many post-its I have, because it made me feel like, yes, this is very relatable. These are situations that I've been in, and I thought it was just me. But it was very eye-opening to see that this is something that, unfortunately, a lot of women do go through. But it's good that you've opened the conversation about it, and you have the research behind it, and hopefully more research to come in the future. So Dr. Amber Tichenor, thank you so much for joining us today. I had so much fun, and I really look forward to read more from what you've been doing with this kind of research.
Well, thank you so much. I've loved the conversation. Thank you for bringing Behind Frenemy Lines to Kuwait in the Middle East. I appreciate you and all the work you are doing, and I know we will have future collaborations in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.